Welcome back to the Loft at Home. We're excited to wrap up our playlist series tonight. And so we've been spending some time in the Psalms, which if you're not familiar with the Psalms, are a section of the Bible that is basically just like poetry and music. It acts as a playlist, and just like you and I have our playlists that help us connect maybe with certain emotions or feelings in a moment, the Psalms do us for that, and they ground them in God. And the best thing about the Psalms that we're going to find out tonight is that the Psalms do not brush away our feelings, but instead they let us feel all of those things, and then they anchor them to what is true. Now, when I was a kid, I had a whole lot of fears, and it's weird being a dad because I can see those playing out in my kid. And one of the things that Emery and I have in common as kids was that we were afraid of being left. Okay, and so I always had this fear, right, when my parents were getting into the car, that they were going to somehow forget to put me in the car as well. Or I'll never forget being very, very small, and my dad was always working on a project or something, so I feel like we spent a crazy amount of time in Lowe's, and we're walking out of Lowe's, and my dad is just walking significantly faster than me, and he walks out of the doors, and the automatic doors shut, and I was literally so small at the time that as I approached the doors, they didn't open. Like, there was not enough of me, right? Like, imagine just this, I'm already not a big guy, but an even smaller version of that. There was not enough of me to open the doors, and so I broke down as if my dad was not going to come back into Lowe's, like he was going to drive off and just be like, all right, one less mouth to feed. Like, that's what it felt like in those moments. I was terrified of being left. Like, I was the nightlight kid, like I was all of those things for a huge chunk of my childhood. And the reality is that a lot of us, even if that's not something that we really feel to that degree as kids, none of us particularly enjoys being left. None of us enjoys being abandoned. See, we've spent some time in the Psalms and talking about joy, and last week we began to traffic in the world of despair and some darkness, and today we're going to take that all the way into this feeling of abandonment. And the reality is for a lot of you sitting in houses right now, man, you have felt abandonment to some degree, right? Like, maybe you felt it really close at home, and you felt it from a parent. Maybe your parents split up, or one of your parents walked out on you, or maybe you never even knew a parent in whatever setting it is, or maybe your parent passed away when you were real young, and that, even though they didn't opt to leave you, it just still feels like abandonment because their presence is not there. Maybe you felt abandoned by coaches, right? Some of you who are athletes who find yourselves playing a sport, and you find yourself being really emotionally connected to these men and women who are training you and investing in you as an athlete, and then they just go to another school, or they move to another district, and all of a sudden they're not there, and you've attached your relationship to them and the sport that you love for so long, and it feels like they've abandoned you. Maybe you feel that from friends. Maybe you've had friends for a really long time that now, as you're beginning to move into the world of middle school and high school, and social structures are changing and your world is changing, maybe your friend group is changing too, and you begin to feel abandoned by the people that you've known and loved for so long. Maybe you're entering into the dating world, and so you've maybe had a relationship, and that relationship has ended, and you feel abandoned by that person that maybe you even thought that you loved at some point or another. And what's really hard about my job often is that I know in ministry that my people can feel abandoned even by me. I remember just a few years ago when I was leaving First Baptist Graham to come to First Baptist Marble Falls, and having to walk through the emotions of the teenagers that I loved in another city, and now going to someplace else, and what it felt like for them of, why is this guy going where God is calling him to be? And they had this feeling of abandonment. It's not a feeling that's new to us, right? Some of you even sitting in these seats can remember when the guy before me was here, and he was changing, and he was shifting, and man, it's hard, it's difficult. And what's hard in the midst of that is what happens is when we experience things in the real world and in real time, we begin to then take those feelings into our relationship with God, and we feel those things there too. When we begin to feel abandoned by the people that we love, that can begin to seep into our relationship with God, and we can begin to feel abandoned by God, because when we feel abandoned, the world kind of gets a little bit darker around us, and it gets a little bit harder, and we feel a little bit more lonely, and it feels a little bit maybe harder to see God in the midst of all of those things. And so we assume, well, man, not only have the people around us, the physical, the tangible people around us, have they left and we feel abandoned by them, but now we feel abandoned by God, who is supposed to always be present and supposed to always be there. And we look around and we go, man, God, where are you? Like, I'm hurting now, and I feel like you should enter into this moment, but it really feels like things are only getting worse. And so I assume then that you're not there. And that's a real feeling. And that's a real moment that a lot of us find ourselves into. And sometimes it's not just a moment. Sometimes it's a really long period of our lives that we can wrestle with this abandonment issue for a really long time. And it can affect ongoing relationships as we move in so many different directions and as we grow up in life. And where we're going to go today in Psalm 22, it's a really long psalm. I hope that you read the whole thing in your home group before this, because I'm only going to kind of read the beginning and the end of it for us. But what I think we're going to find in Psalm 22 is that it gives us permission to feel that thing to its fullest extent and to take that feeling to God, but then it's going to anchor us in truth. It doesn't use truth to brush away a feeling. It uses truth to anchor that feeling. It gives that feeling weight, but it gives it a place to go, not just to float aimlessly in the world. And so Psalm 22 is credited to David as he's writing. If you don't know anything about David, this is the David that fights Goliath. This is King David. There's a long period of David's life where he's on the run, and it feels like the people that he loved are against him, and they are hunting him down, and they are trying to kill him. I mean, there's a lot of turmoil in David's life after his affair with Bathsheba, and his own sons are turning against each other, and his own sons are out to get him at different times. I mean, David's life, he has some really, really high highs, but he has some really, really low lows. And so when David writes out of his emotion of feeling abandoned, this is a really important thing, because he really has felt that to his core. And Psalm 22 verse 1 says this, and we're just going to read through verse 5. It says, my God, why have you abandoned me? Why are you so far from my deliverance and from my words of groaning? My God, I cry by day, but you do not answer. By night, yet I have no rest. In verse 3, it kind of begins to switch a little bit. But you are holy, enthroned on the praises of Israel. Our fathers trusted in you. They trusted, and you rescued them. They cried to you, and you were set free. They trusted in you and were not disgraced. Now, the way that Psalm 22 ends, if you go to 27, it says this, and all the ends of the earth will remember and turn to the Lord. All the families of the nations will bow down before you, for kingship belongs to the Lord. He rules the nations. All who prosper on earth will eat and bow down. All those who go down to the dust will kneel before him, even the one who cannot preserve his life. Their descendants will serve him. The next generation will be told about the Lord. They will come and declare his righteousness. To a people yet to be born, they will declare what he has done. Psalm 22 starts out with David's emotion and his feeling of God not being there, but it ends, and David's emotions haven't changed, right? Nothing in the end of Psalm 22 is about David's emotion. Instead, it's about God and what is true. And so David's emotions haven't changed. He's just communicating what is true about God. And what I really think that David's doing is he's trying desperately to remind himself that when he thinks that God isn't going to show up in a moment, and where he feels a thing in a moment, that God is actually going to do things not just in his life, but in generations to come. And so he reminds himself of not even just an immediate future, but a very, very far future, where even if God doesn't come into this moment, and this is the end of David's story, God is still God. And so he anchors his emotion and his feeling into this truth. Guys, in the midst of our abandonment and our pain and our suffering, Psalm 22 gives us permission to totally and completely feel that. And what happens a lot of times in Christian world is we try to make sure that you don't feel that. We often try to come and cover that up and push to goodness and push to this positive story, and we don't want you to feel that way for too long. But here's the deal, right? Just like with any good playlist, the best music that we love, right, is the music that we go and we listen to in our room when no one's around, and we put our earbuds in, we put our AirPods in, and it just helps us come in tune with our emotions, and it feels like it's a place that we can go that we can't go to anyone else with. And Psalm 22 gives us this place that says, hey, this is a place that you can go when it feels like everyone's left, when it feels like no one's there, And you can even go to God and say, hey, I don't feel you here. Where are you? I know that you've maybe shown up in these other areas, and you've even shown up. Look, there's my friend's life. You're showing up in theirs. Are you going to show up in mine? And it gives us permission to tell God that, to verbalize that, to speak that out loud to God. And he is not offended. And here's what's wonderful. He's so not offended, he actually understands your experience. In Psalm 22, verse 1, my God, why have you abandoned me? That is eerily, almost identical language. If you're familiar with the Bible at all, with Jesus on the cross, and there's a moment where in each gospel we're kind of given a picture of Jesus on the cross and his response to God, and we're kind of get to enter into the humanity of Jesus. And there's one moment where Jesus says, my God, why have you forsaken me? We're forsaken and abandoned. I mean, those are very similar emotions, very similar moments. And so God, because of your relationship through Jesus, actually understands this. And Jesus understands that feeling of abandonment because he felt it too. Because when he was on the cross, he felt abandoned by God, even though he, of all people, knows what is true, even though he knew he was in the center of God's will, that it was still a dark moment, and he still felt abandoned, and he still went to God. There's a phrase out there that I kind of hate, and it's this idea, and it says this, facts don't care about your feelings. And sometimes we take that in Christian world and we go, well, because this is true about Jesus, right? We look at Psalm 22, there is both fact and feeling present. The reality is God cares deeply about our feelings, but truth is there to anchor them. Feelings without truth flow aimlessly. They don't give us a place to go, but feelings anchored to truth don't make us abandon our feelings and not feel them and tell us that we're weak for feeling them or that they're not real or that they're not true. It just gives us a place to go that says you don't have to be here now and you don't have to be here tomorrow, but we should always be working there eventually and reminding ourselves of that truth. It's a fact that upholds our feelings and gives our feelings weight and gives them a place to go, not one that dismisses them. And so many times in Christian world, we can feel like we're supposed to just dismiss those aside. And so people, how are you doing? Oh, I'm doing okay. I'm doing good. But the real work of walking with Jesus is to camp out in the first few verses of Psalms 22 and say, my God, why have you abandoned me? Why are you so far from my deliverance? And when we can be honest about how we feel about God's distance to us, then we can begin to understand how close he actually is. But we can never navigate truth until we have properly navigated our feelings. There used to be a Christian radio station that I listened to on the way to school every morning when my parents would drive me to school when I was a kid. And it was called K-Love, and the tagline was positive, encouraging K-Love. And it was this idea, right, that all of the Christian music on it just made you happy, and it was joyful because it was about Jesus, and so you couldn't sing it with a smile, without having a smile on your face, and it was supposed to make you feel a thing that maybe you didn't feel in the moment, as if you could convince yourself that something was not true inside of you. The best part about the Bible is that not all of Psalms is going to fit its way into positive, encouraging K-Love. Psalms, for the most part, it's never going to sit there and in your deepest, darkest moments give you the God has a plan, or this too shall pass, or what God meant for bad, God meant for good. Instead, Psalms gives us a place to really feel it. And God gives us a place to really feel it. And here's the reality. We hope that we're creating a home, that we're creating a family where we can really feel it, where we're okay that a lot of us have been abandoned. And so a lot of us are angry and a lot of us are sad. And Psalm 22 is going to give us some music that really helps us feel that. And then on the back end of it in the distance says, but here's what God is doing in the generations. Here is who God is. And it's going to anchor all of that feeling. So that way one day, maybe we feel that truth more than we feel it today. We'll see you at the Loft Live next week.